First of all, I'd like to thank you for accepting the invitation this evening. I was keen to meet with as many of you as possible for two primary reasons. The first is to share some insight into the change that's happening in my country, in Syria, and specifically the primary and the central role that culture is playing in the way that we plan and see the change evolving. Within that context, I'd of course like to comment and give you my own perspectives of the cooperation between our two countries in this regard. But I also realize that I'm sitting in a room with an elite group of French intellectuals, practitioners, and thinkers in the topic at hand this evening. So as much as I would like to share my own perspectives with you, I'm hoping this evening can be a dialogue in which I can also benefit from your own insights and your own perspectives. So I'm looking forward to a healthy and honest question and answer debate type of an evening. I'm going to start by giving you a little bit of insight into Syria. And I appreciate that most of the audience here this evening knows that Syria is a modern nation, but also one that has a rich history. It has seen, shaped, and been shaped by thousands of years of civilizations and cultures over a long period of time. You of course know that between Damascus and Aleppo, we have the oldest continuously inhabited city in the world and the oldest inhabited capital in the world. The first phonetic alphabet, the first musical note, and the origins of agriculture, to name but a few. Today, many visitors come to Syria, some academic and knowledgeable like yourselves, others adventurous and curious, wanting to see for themselves the physical evidence left behind through thousands of years of human interaction. But for Syrians, for us locals, this heritage has a much more personal meaning. For a country that has such a vast and diverse history, it's not so much the hardware, the artifacts, and the architecture that make up who we are and define our character and personality, but it's rather the software, the accumulation and interweaving of thousands of years' worth of values, customs, habits, traditions. That essentially, for us, this is what these physical objects represent. So in that context, these artifacts have a very real, direct, and emotional attachment to the Syrian population. They embody our spirit of openness and engagement. And if anything, they show us that in the world that is currently changing and evolving so quickly, I like to refer to them as our compass or our anchor. So regardless of where we go and which direction we head, we have a solid and sound footing that keeps us firmly rooted. The culture has evolved and the society has evolved. It has learned to interact. Again, as I said, over thousands of years of different cultures and civilization. I like to think of it as flowing water. If the water flows, it's constantly refreshed, it's clean, it benefits from new perspectives and new insights. Water that doesn't flow becomes stagnant, stale, old, and disease-infested. So, if anything, as I said, the culture in Syria is constantly renewing itself, and the society in Syria is constantly renewing itself. It's open and it's diverse. Some often ask me, how then can Syria remain stable, moderate, and influential in a region that is increasingly being surrounded by extremism, ideologism, sectarianism, and all other forms of negative perceptions in our society? The typical answer I get is because of military, political, security reasons. Again, I believe I have a different view. It's the very essence of our culture. It's what our history teaches us of openness and engagement. It's the sense of identity and pride that we have, knowing who we are in the world and knowing what we've contributed to the world over thousands of years, that gives us that sense of stability and that sense of moderation. The world, as you all know, is changing, and it's changing at an extremely rapid pace. Now, we have one of two options. We can either try and protect ourselves, try and protect the very essence of who we are, and in a way have an inward-looking approach, or we can be active. We can willingly and openly say that we're not going to allow external forces, negative forces, to influence and tarnish the very values and characteristics that essentially make us who we are. And of course, we choose the latter. We choose to engage, we choose to continue to be open, but more importantly, we choose to show that in the region we live in, moderation and stability is the only way that we can continue to prosper and develop as a nation. Some of you may think that I'm talking politics. Indeed, we live in a highly politicized region and in highly politicized times. But trust me, I have no interest in politics. My interests lie elsewhere. But living in the region for as long as I have, I realize that politics fundamentally affects every facet of our lives. It affects every facet of our lives, but yet it doesn't provide us with the tools required to be able to develop the modern nation and the modern society that we wish to be. Without education, without culture, without open economies, we won't be able to continue to develop in the modern world. So as I said, it may seem as though I'm talking politics, but for me, it's fundamentally about the very essence of culture and what culture can provide in the modern world today. It becomes even more important, though, when for a country like Syria that is going through rapid change, economically and socially, that we have to think of culture as being the core of everything we try to do. In the globalized and often homogenized world we live in, with a very dominant English language, but also a very dominant Anglo-Saxon culture, and with all its positives, it remains one of many. It becomes extremely difficult for nations like Syria and nations like France to continue to diversify or enrich the diversity of our national identities. And this is crucial if we're to continue to survive and continue to play an influential role in our region. And it's for that reason that we have placed culture as the primary, at the heart of everything we're trying to do in developing Syria today. As I said earlier, the country is going through remarkable change across all fronts. Economically, the economy is opening up. We are diversifying. Just a couple of years ago, private banks didn't exist. Recently, a stock exchange has opened. We are the only country in the Middle East to have legislation that regulates microfinance and microcredit. We're in the process of finalizing SME legislation. So across the economic front, many, many changes are happening. And I'd like to hope that these changes are not just aimed at the big national companies, but rather are encouraging the smaller businesses, the medium-sized enterprises. And as such, the growth that we're looking for is not just a measurement of statistics and numbers, but actually a growth that is inclusive to the entire population. Our education system is completely being overhauled. We realize that in a modern economy and in a modern society, education has to be relevant. And at the pace that the world is changing, it's sometimes hard to keep up with that change. I remember when I studied computer science, by the time I'd graduated, half the programming languages that I had been taught at university had become redundant by the time I was looking for a job. So the focus on our education system is not only the knowledge and the information that our students need to gain, but it's increasingly the skills and the attitudes that will ensure that they're able to compete and create the opportunities required for our country to flourish in the 21st century. Where does culture fit into all of this? The country, as I said, with its vast and rapid development, can't lose sight of the very essence of who we are. If we develop and become a nation that no longer has its identity and no longer has a sense of its being, I believe we fundamentally lost the most valuable asset we have. And once it's gone, it's impossible for it to return. 3 years ago, the Syrian government embarked on an ambitious vision to incorporate culture in the way that we plan and see for the change that's happening in the country. What do I mean by that specifically? We have 5,000 historic monuments spread across the country, over 30 museums, hundreds of artifacts, thousands of artifacts, in fact. And we can either choose to look at these artifacts and everything they represent, or this history and everything it represents, by looking in the past, so looking backwards and trying to move forwards. Or we can look forward, but keep our eye on the rearview mirror. And this is essentially what we have embarked on 3 years ago. The vision that we hope to launch in April has 5 core components at the heart. One is that the story of Syria, which essentially is the story for me, it represents not just the story of Syria, but actually the story of humanity, is to be told and to be reflected in a way that not just today's generation, but future generations can continue to benefit and realize and gain strength from the rich heritage that we have. I don't mean this in a static manner, in the sense that there's a disconnection between the history of the past and the reality of today. Quite the opposite. And as I said, there's a very direct and real relationship between the artifacts of Syria's past and the spirit of openness and engagement of its people today. And that's something that we need to safeguard, and it's not something I believe we need to build